Dear students, today we will discuss about New Economic Policy 1991. The purpose of this New Economic Policy 1991 was to bring out economic reforms in India. What are economic reforms? These are measures aiming at changing the structure of economy. Structure of economy. Economic reforms. These are the measures that are taken by the government in order to bring out change in the structure of economy. जैसे कि ट्रेडिशनल सेक्टर से मॉडर्न सेक्टर to इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर या कंट्रोलर इकोनॉमी को चेंज करना into liberalized economy में in which government acts as a facilitator, not as a regulator. जैसे कि privatization of different sectors of economy, जैसे कि इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन में इजी मेजर्स अडॉप्ट करना, उससे क्या होता है, जो इकोनॉमी होती है वो डेवलप होती है. देयर इज इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ ऑफ इकोनॉमी, देयर इज इम्प्रूवमेंट ऑफ इकोनॉमी. इसका जो मेन टारगेट होता है दैट इज economic growth of economy, improvement in the economic conditions of population. And in India, these economic reforms started in 1991 when economy became open economy. 1991 में Indian economy became open economy. When there was free flow of goods and services with other countries, when international trade was allowed, no restrictions on imports and exports were imposed. Simply, international trade was allowed, जिसमें import and export of goods and services होता है. International trade was allowed. That is trade of imports and exports with other countries, with rest of world. And what was the need of these economic reform started in 1991? What was the reason behind this new economic policy 1991 which brought about economic reforms in India? Need of this reform, or the reasons behind this economic reform, behind this economic policy 1991. Number one was fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, it is the difference between total revenue, we can write total receipts. Total revenue means कुल आमदनी. Total revenue excluding loans. इस पे लोन इंक्लूड नहीं होता है. And total expenditure of public, total expenditure of government. And it is calculated with the help of this formula, fiscal deficit. It is equal to total expenditure of government, total public expenditure, minus total revenue, total public revenues, total revenue of the government, total receipts of the government, excluding हम लिखेंगे माइनस loans. And when government's expenditure, total expenditure is more than total revenue of government, then there is fiscal deficit. When there is excess of government's expenditure or and above it is total revenue, total receipts, there is fiscal deficit, and it is measured in terms of percentage of GDP. Measured, calculated as a percentage of GDP. And it was about 8.4% of GDP at the time when economic reforms started. When new economic policy of 1991 was adopted, at that time, that is in 1991, the economy was facing huge fiscal deficit, high fiscal deficit, that is 8.4% of GDP. And this fiscal deficit shows the public borrowing, कितना उधार लिया है गवर्नमेंट ने. It was 8%, 8.4% of GDP. And this total expenditure, it includes a revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure such as administrative expenses, or interest payment, and capital expenditure में आता है, it includes creation of long-term assets such as expenditure on infrastructure development, such as expenditure on roads, buildings, factories, buildings, etc. And इसी तरह जो टोटल रेवेन्यू है it includes revenue receipts and capital receipts. Revenue receipts such as tax revenues, and non-tax revenues, non-tax receipts, tax revenues, and non-tax receipts. Non-tax receipts in the form of fees, fines, such as licensing fees, fines, etc. And cattle receipts, which creates liabilities for the government. It is in the form of public borrowing, such as public borrowing, or borrowing from financial institutions, international financial institutions. And when this total expenditure of government exceeds total revenue of the government, it is known as fiscal deficit, and it was about 8.4%. Means the public borrowing of the was about 8.4% of GDP. This has much consequences. This imposes a threat on the economic growth of economy, so that in order to overcome this problem of the economy, and economic reforms were started in 1991. And the second need of this reform was adverse balance of payment. एडवर्स बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट, जिसको हम शॉर्ट में लिखते हैं BOP, बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट. व्हाट इज बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट? It is a systematic record of economic transactions between the residents of one country and the residents of other countries with which the country is trading. It shows the values of imports and exports, import of goods and services, export of goods and services, and it is double entry statement showing creditors, that is inflow, such as exports of goods and services, and debitors, which shows the outflow, that is the value of imports of goods and services, and it also includes unilateral transfer payment, such as gifts, and also foreign direct investment, external borrowings. And there was adverse balance of payment of Indian economy at the time of economic reform, that is in 1991. The Indian economy was facing severe balance of payment problem. Its income was less than its payment, that is income in the form of exports of goods and services, and payment in the form of import of goods and services, and that lead to outflow of currency. जब import ज़्यादा होगा, export कम होगा, there will be outflow of currency. Outflow of currency, meaning it reduces the national income of country. That has a severe implications on other sectors of economy, such as low demand, low production, low employment, low income, again low demand, vicious circle. And in order to improve the balance of payment of economy of India, these economic reforms were initiated. Third need था fall in foreign exchange reserves. Fall in Foreign exchange reserves. Foreign exchange reserves. Because imports were more than exports, there was outflow of currency for exchange reserves, and this foreign exchange reserves इसको हम लिखते हैं FER, foreign exchange reserves, and includes foreign currencies, such as dollars, gold, and third one is SDR, special drawing rights. This you will learn in our next class, in class 12th. Here you have to remember that foreign exchange it includes foreign currencies such as dollars, gold, special drawing rights (SDR), and there was fall of this foreign exchange reserve of India in 1990 before the economic reforms were initiated. And it is said that in 1991 foreign exchange reserves were so low that FER, foreign exchange reserves were so low that it cannot make payment for imports. Means India can't. I will write here that India can't support to make a bill payment, for imports of 10 days. अगर हम 10 दिन के जो imports होंगे goods and services, उसका जो बिल बनता, इंडिया के पास उतने फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व्स नहीं थे, डॉलर्स नहीं थे, गोल्ड नहीं था, स्पेशल ड्राइविंग राइट्स नहीं था कि वो पे कर सकता है इंपोर्ट्स का जो वैल्यू है फॉर 10 डेज के लिए. उतना कम रिजर्व था इनके पास, फॉरेन एक्सचेंज रिजर्व, कि सपोर्ट नहीं कर सकता था टू मेक पेमेंट फॉर द वैल्यू ऑफ इंपोर्ट्स ऑफ 10 डेज. A severe problem of Indian economy. And one more reason to initiate this economic reform, new economic policy of 1991 was inflation, high inflation. Inflation, as you know, it is persistent or consistent rise in price level. जब price level में लगातार increase होगा तो उसको हम कहते हैं इन्फ्लेशन. से क्या होता है, जो वैल्यू ऑफ मनी वो कम होता है, परचेजिंग पावर ऑफ मनी कम होता है. एंड एज पर द डेटा, द एवरेज रेट ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन इन 1991 it was about 17%. And due to this inflation, the purchasing power of money decreases. It has a much impact on the purchasing power of money of poor people. Poor people cannot afford to purchase the goods and services at high price, and in order to solve this problem, the government has initiated economic reforms in economy of India. And what was that economic reforms? That was adoption of LPG model. Liberalization, L means liberalization, P is privatization, G is globalization. Certain restrictions, economic restrictions were lifted out in order to boost the economy, in order to improve the economic growth of economy. And this liberalization, privatization, globalization model, these had certain features, certain aims that we will discuss in our next lecture. I hope you have got this. Thanks.